What about personality? Those things that make us unique, that make us different. When do we really develop a personality in a sense, and how does it develop? Well, that's an area that, again, we're interested in developmental psychology, particularly within the area of social and emotional development, the development of personality. And you might think about babies, and when we think about babies, we don't really think of them as having a personality per se, but babies do definitely respond to their environment in different ways. That some babies are more easily upset than others. Some may be more intense in terms of their emotional expressions and things like that. And we see some of those differences from birth. And so what we talk about, the term that we use in referring to those differences that we see at birth, is temperament. And so temperament is defined as a person's characteristic inborn style of dealing with the world. Now, again, because we see it immediately after birth, we assume that it is inborn because at that point, babies have not really had an opportunity to have those experiences that would allow them to develop those styles of responding to things in their environment. And we think of temperament as being sort of a precursor or being very similar to personality in a lot of ways. And in some cases, that early temperament may be a bit of a predictor of personality later, but that's not always necessarily the case. So, developmental psychologists and others have long studied temperament, and some of the earlier researchers who studied temperament looked at different dimensions of temperament and how different dimensions or different traits associated with temperament sort of add up or combine to develop different temperamental types. And so lots of times when people talk about temperament, they use terms like easy, difficult, or slow to warm up, because that's one of those kind of popular ways or real common ways of expressing differences in temperament. But those differences in temperament are based on things like how fearful or fearless a particular child might be, how exuberant or shy they might be, that type of thing. And it's really based on a series or a number of traits. And so these are the different traits that this model, the Thomas and Chess model of temperamental differences, is based on. They identified 9 different traits or trait dimensions. So these are things that are on a spectrum, and they suggested that where children lie on these different perspectives or these different perspectives or spectrums add up to that child's temperament and determine whether they have an easy, a difficult, or a slow to warm up temperament. So you see that those different traits are things like activity, rhythmicity, affect, quality of mood, intensity, approach, adaptability, sensitivity, distractibility, and persistence. And you can look at this table to see, some of the terms that are used to describe a child that would have a low expression of that trait or a child that would have a high expression of that trait. So you can look over those and get a sense for what those are. But again, Thomas and Chess suggested that those sort of add up in individual children to make them or to sort of cause either an easy, a difficult, or a slow to warm up temperament. And so, in terms of an easy temperament, what they meant by that is a child that is pretty adaptable, so they don't get too upset about changes in their environment and that type of thing. They just sort of adjust to that stuff. Children who are pretty likely to display positive moods and emotions, who have pretty normal eating and sleeping patterns. And then children with a difficult temperament are children who are pretty emotional, who are irritable and fussy, who tend to be pretty irregular in things like their eating and sleeping patterns. The slow to warm up temperament is characterized by a low activity level. So these are babies that when they're in new situations, they tend to be sort of withdrawn. They tend to be slow to adapt, but they accept those new experiences eventually when they've had time to sort of warm up to those experiences and that type of thing. Now, one of the things that people often ask or people have questioned about those different temperamental styles is, are there certain styles or is there a style that is better than another when it comes to child outcomes? And you might expect that that easy child is going to do better than, say, a difficult or a slow to warm up child. But it turns out that the key is not in the type of temperament, but in terms of something that we call goodness of fit. And goodness of fit involves adapting the environment and the routines in that baby's environment to better fit that child's temperament. And it seems that when individuals can do that, when parents can do that, their babies, at least for the most part, seem to have a better outcome. So it's not so much the temperament itself as much as whether or not there is this goodness of fit with their environment.